You know how the James Comer-led impeachment investigation into President Joe Biden has just completely fallen apart because they aren't able to find anything close to wrongdoing on the part of President Biden? Well, as we've talked about, that served as a distraction. A lot of these hearings, these investigations by MAGA Republicans in the House, it distracts from their lack of actual policies being implemented to benefit people's lives and distracts them from, in this case, convicted felon Donald Trump and his issues. And so because one of their favorite political stunts, distractions, has fallen apart, this impeachment investigation, they need to figure out what to do next. How else can we serve Trump in these sorts of ridiculous ways? Well, this time it's bringing back the greatest hits, and that means calling Dr. Anthony Fauci into one of these hearings. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was so triggered by the very presence of Dr. Anthony Fauci that she spiraled into a series of meltdowns that are honestly disturbing. And you'll see the audience behind Fauci is sort of shocked. One guy puts his hand into his face into his hand, and you have Democrats responding in horror to the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying. You'll have Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz sort of mocking her and Trump. So a lot to look at here, but truly wild to get ready. After playing this first clip, I'll explain before playing the second one, sort of what the hatred is, where it's coming from. Doesn't make any sense. It's not rational, but explain where the hatred comes from for these MAGA folks and their conspiracy theories about Dr. Fauci. Here's the first one from MTG.
Especially when the NIH and these government agencies, most powerful agencies in our country, are recommending medical suggestions and advice and making up guidelines like 6 feet distancing and masking of children. Do you think that's appropriate? Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci? Because you're not doctor, you're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here. Mr.
Just the childishness that exudes from her is really hard to process. Here that moment is again.
Mr. Fauci, because you're not doctor, you're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman,
Fauci,
objection.
I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time, Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mr. Chairman,
point of order.
Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time, that man does not deserve to have a license.
I'm going to really quickly pause your viewing of this video to ask you to subscribe. I continue to be absolutely blown away by how many of you are doing that every time I ask. So if you haven't yet, please make sure you've clicked that subscribe button.
As a matter of fact, it should be revoked and he belongs in
Gentlelady
prison.
will suspend. The gentlelady should recognize the doctor as a doctor.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is this what we have become? Is this what we have devolved into?
The answer is unfortunately yes. So before playing more, and it just gets worse from there, I almost am hesitant to do what I'm about to do, but I'm going to try to, so I can explain and give you context, I'm going to try to put myself in the mind of a crazy person, MTG, and explain what, okay, of course they're going to be wrong about their hatred of Dr. Fauci, but where is it coming from? What would they say the argument is? And I think a lot of this comes from, at least for MTG and some others, a lack of understanding about what the scientific method even demands, what science is, because there's other moments where she says, Fauci, do you think you represent science? And I've heard people discuss that term in a way that sort of indicates you could open up the book of science and there's just a stagnant answer for everything, when in reality it's an ever-changing, evolving process. As the facts change, as we learn more, as we study more, we enhance our understanding of subjects. And so with an unprecedented situation like the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the ways Greene tries to attack public health officials is by pointing to what she would say are contradictions, but are really just changes in understanding about the vaccines and the efficacy and how it impacts hospitalization versus transmission. infection, and then how masks play into this, how keeping each other apart, and social distancing. And I'll say as an overarching point, it's bonkers to me that given how unprecedented that moment was, and that over 1 million Americans have died since the start of this, that you would have people so hostile to individuals like Dr. Fauci who were just trying to recommend the best thing at that point in time. And of course, we should be better safe than sorry. And we weren't. It's one of the reasons for much of the pandemic, especially under the leadership of Trump, we were experiencing it worse than many comparable countries. And so it's just all very disturbing seeing even this far out how much rage and how much misinformation spews from people like MTG. But then you have a more complicated theory, and without spending a bunch of time explaining, as I was trying to dive in and figure out what is going on here in MAGA world with all these theories, why is Dr. Fauci such an antagonist? They have created, and this comes from, it's so hard to explain because it comes from Trump shouldn't be blamed for this when he was the president, and that kind of started the Fauci, and Trump was a little bit hostile to public health officials, and so then MAGA justified that by creating these theories, and it all spiraled out of control. And now they're saying Fauci created the pandemic, some of them do, and this is a part of some deep state globalist plot to do whatever the heck it is that they ultimately want to do. Make us eat bugs, as we hear from Alex Jones and others quite often. But it's connecting us funding research, as we do, of course, sometimes in coordination with other countries and organizations in other countries, into viruses, coronaviruses specifically, which makes sense, one of the most common types of viruses. Then even more specific than that, they are referencing, and you'll hear it sometimes in these hearings, gain of function research, which is the testing of how viruses become more transmissible. And so they incorrectly say we were funding that research that then was used to create a virus that was unleashed, right? But the way they're connecting those dots is we were funding an organization that was funding research being done in Wuhan at some point in time. And then also in Wuhan, there was gain of function research. And so then they connect those dots, right? So there's this, similar to a lot of these theories, this incorrect thinking that leads to a theory they can have that comes with it a lot of documentation, a lot of complicated words about viruses and organizations that is really compelling to your average MAGA person, but isn't actually representative of the truth. But then it motivates and gives more credibility to these really unhinged statements from people like MTG. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, it's trying to get my head into the mind of a crazy person, which is difficult. But here's the next moment.
Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes
Again,
or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no answer.
Yes, it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
It is an interesting point from Fauci whenever he said that in that interview. Obviously, taken out of context, you can mock it, but he's saying in their attacks against him, often for giving the best advice based on the understanding of the facts that we had at that point in time in an unprecedented situation, that he was representing how we approach such subjects with the scientific method. And that then becomes, Fauci told you that he wanted you to blah, 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 which is not at all correct. Here's a little bit more from this.
Where you confess that you made up the COVID rules, including
I didn't hear what you
6
said.
feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You made it up as you
I didn't say
went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
But this is science.
What does dogs have to do with anything that we're talking about today?
These are scientific experiments. This is what you signed off on. But you also told the American...
Yeah, so again, it's painful. You saw the guy putting his face in his hand, and to me, this is just embarrassing for Marjorie, but I know that a lot of people are rooting her on and think this is absolutely fantastic, but even the 6 feet thing, if you're 6 feet away, That was sort of the guidelines. Obviously, if you're 10 feet away, you're even less likely to get COVID. But then they'll say, oh, but someone got it and they were 6 feet. Or why not 5 feet and 11 inches? Why not 6 feet and 2 inches? These are all just odds, okay? If you're that distance, we feel like that's probably the one that is the most doable for people, that will keep them more safe than if they were closer. But obviously, if you even further, you'd be better off. Or if you wore a really, really, really good type of mask, you'd be better off. Or vaccinated, less likely to be hospitalized or die. Doesn't mean there's no likelihood, just less likely. But then because I guess sort of that concept doesn't really land, that we're just changing the percentage chance something could happen. And it could still happen, but it's just making you safer. Then this becomes a slam dunk for them. But why 6 feet exactly? What's the exact study that shows that's perfect? It's not. 10 feet would be better. 30 feet, you'd probably be really safe now. It's just that's what they landed on as a general recommendation. Oh, it hurts my brain to even talk about this again. I feel like we're years ago. Here's Marjorie then saying this.
You know that what this committee should be doing? We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
And then in response to that, you had Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz saying this.
You talked about how, we live in partisan times, a lot of misinformation, and, colleagues on this body said, you should be, charged and found guilty. Of course, the only one that's happened to is your former boss.
Donald Trump. That's it. And the real thing that should be investigated here, unironically, based on what public health officials like Dr. Birx have said publicly about Trump's mishandling of the pandemic, is how many people died because of the mishandling by the Trump administration. Truly. Dr. Birx put it in the hundreds of thousands of people because of the messed up response that wasn't effective enough, didn't take it seriously enough. You had Trump and his officials contradicting those who knew the most at that point in time as to how we should be responding. And a bunch of people suffered because of it. And instead, they're trying to attack Dr. Fauci, who I have absolutely no doubt was doing the best that he could based on the information he had and based on the crazy boss that he had for much of the pandemic he had to deal with. And the way they need in these conspiracy theories, a strong antagonist who, Dr. Fauci, you can create these stories around Dr. Fauci did all of this to, I don't even know what the outcome would be, to serve pharmaceutical companies, which he's benefiting from somehow. And it is frightening, as is so often the end of segments, that this is where we are. In the House of Representatives, this is the nonsense. Marjorie Taylor Greene doing this. That's what we have to be showing to the rest of the world as to what our work looks like in such a powerful institution. Let me know what you thought in the comments of that absurdity.